Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 176. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Elma Linz Kanefield about her book, Hamlet's Mirror, Reaching Your Potential on Stage and Off. It is a book designed for performing artists, but the advice it contains could apply to all artists and artists at heart. Elma is a psychotherapist and one of the world's only specialists in the psychology of the performing artist, and she knows what she's talking about. Her own horrifying experience with stage fright as a young performer in New York City led her to become a mental health clinician and to write this book. She began writing Hamlet's Mirror nearly 30 years ago, but never quite finished it, until now. Elma is quick to point out that if she had finished the book any earlier, she wouldn't have had the benefit of her nearly 4 decades of learning and practicing in the field. In Hamlet's Mirror, she discusses why artists and performers do what they do, the pressures they experience as a result, and why the goal should be to strive for excellence, not perfection. In this episode, I'll chat with Elma about her writing journey, why artists need to understand the concept she calls performance potential, and her specific advice for writers, as well as a few other things coming up. Elma Linz Kanefield, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Well, Stacey, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
I thought what we could do today is talk about your new book, Hamlet's Mirror, Reaching Your Potential on Stage and Off. If you don't mind, tell us a little about this book and what inspired you to write it.
This book is written about and for performing artists. I'm a psychotherapist and a life coach who's worked exclusively with this population for about 4 decades. And they have really written the book for me, as I've learned so much, as the title might indicate, Hamlet's Mirror. I named it Hamlet's Mirror because it is our artists, after all, who hold the mirror up to life.
Let's talk about why you decided to write this book now. What was it about working with performers for all these years that made you decide now's a good time to put all that knowledge, teaching, advice, experience into a book?
I started this book 30 some odd years ago. And the learning that I've accumulated, there's very little research about performing artists. And I've been writing, and actually COVID gave me the opportunity to really sit down and do what I've intended to do for 30 years. And I think the timing was right in my life and in what I've learned. Had I written it 15 years ago, I wouldn't have known what I know today. And actually, since I've written the book, I've learned so much more from some of the responses from the performers I've gotten. And that helps me to talk about with you what I mean by performance potential. Performance potential is different for everybody, what it means to everybody. but the general definition that I work toward and with is doing the best that we can do and being the best that we can be at the moment of performance, given what we know at that moment. So I wrote the book, given what I know, and right now I know so much more.
So it sounds like the goal is not necessarily perfection in the broad sense, but more, say, as close to perfection in that particular moment based on everything you know, have, are experiencing.
Yes, I really don't believe that perfection is attainable. As a matter of fact, I think it's how we sabotage ourselves. I talk about in the book excellence. I think we can, each of us, attain excellence. And I give a formula for that in the book, which may fit some people, may not. I hope it's useful. But when you strive for perfection, you take yourself out of the moment. And when a performer, or anyone for that matter, is not present in the moment of performance, in the moment of doing anything that we do, we lose not only the sense of excellence that we strive, but any potential, any excellence that we have inside of us, any uniqueness, because we're not there. We're not there with the music. We're not there with the lines of a play or choreography or vocal line. We're there with some thought which has nothing to do with the art form.
That concept of being in the moment, I mean, that's something we hear not just for performance, but for everybody, like across society, across our experiences, about being present and living in the moment. So I'm sure that concept probably strikes a chord for a lot of people. It's easy to see it when you're talking about a performer being in the moment in order to deliver their performance. But that concept, I think, is something fairly universal. Most people would like to be more present in the moment.
Yes, that's why I think the experiences, the learning that performing artists have demonstrated in this book can really be helpful for everybody. I think we take for granted, all of us, how present performers are in our lives. I mean, how many times do we go to the movies? How many times do we turn on the TV and screen something and crawl into bed and let these actors or musicians into our bedroom? They are very intimate parts of our lives that when we bring that into awareness, we think, well, maybe I could learn something from them. Look how able they are.
And let's talk about your own experiences, because my understanding is you had a particular experience with stage fright early in your career, and that sort of launched you into this field. Can you talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, it's still very organic in my body because it was so horrifying to me. I was in New York studying to be a musical performing artist. And I was on the stage one night thinking, oh my God, can I hit that note? And do I look okay? And will they love me? And waiting for the first chord. And really, is my lipstick on straight? And the chord sounded, and no sound would come out.
Oh, goodness.
I could not produce a note. And finally, I just ran off the stage. And there was nothing wrong with my chords because I went to doctors and I saw therapists, and nobody could help me because nobody understood the psyche of a performer. I went back to school, and the education wasn't geared to this, but I got a degree to make myself legitimate, and I studied myself, and I moved back to the Midwest at that point. Finally, at the age of 40, I moved to New York to open a private practice that was only for performing artists. And I thought, this is the Mecca. This is the chosen land for actors and dancers and singers and musicians. And nobody had a practice exclusive to these artists. So pretty quickly, I was lucky enough to have a pretty thriving practice because the need was there. And then I had the opportunity to start the counseling services at the Juilliard School, and the need was there too.
So you were really your first own case study, it sounds like.
Yes, that's right. Right.
Well, let's talk about what you learned, not just from that very first case study, but over these decades.
Well, that's what the book is about. I learn what prevents performers from reaching this performance potential that I talk about, and what empowers them to realize it. That's what I impart in Hamlet's Mirror in 212 pages. It's a very interactive, self-reflective book. And in it, I do case studies, which are collages. I hope nobody recognizes themselves because my practice, of course, is highly confidential, but it gives a taste of the concepts and ideas that I'm talking about, and have learned from these amazingly courageous people who've come to work out their challenges, both personal and professional.
And when you've worked with these performers, have you found there to be shared experiences, or let's say universal truths? Are there things that these performers have in common?
Yes, there are. That's such a good question. They can identify, a lot of performers knew what they were going to do and be at very, very early ages, especially dancers and musicians. And that can skew their development. For example, take a cellist. A cellist at 6, 7 years old can practice 4 or 5 hours a day with a teacher who is or can be beautifully invested in this musician, which means almost that this teacher becomes another parent, which can skew family relations. But the musician really can miss childhood because the musician goes to school, maybe practices before he or she or they go to school, and then afterwards. Where is time for basketball or fun dance class or giggling? It's a very passionate, determined, focused way to grow up. May I ask you a personal question?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What did you want to be as a little girl?
Oh, goodness. Probably my first dream was to be a ballet dancer.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then maybe a teacher, and then a whole host of things.
Okay. Did it take over your life?
No.
Okay.
No.
But if you had decided that your life depended on bar work every day, how different do you think your life would have been?
Yeah, that's a completely different existence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would say I'm going to go out on a limb. Most artists have that existence.
Mm.
Their passion for many reasons, which are in the book, some inspired by parents, some by artists they know, and some by loss of an important figure in their life, and it fills such a void, or loss of an important parental fit. It can get very psychological, and I write about this. And from the comments that I've gotten, this has really resonated, which makes me very happy. How many dentists do you know who are drilling away at 6 years old?
True. I'm sort of envisioning the idea of external pressures applied to these performers, even from a young age, and certainly probably once their careers are successful, versus maybe like their own internal struggles.
You mean their own wants and needs versus the cultural given?
Yeah.
Yes, I have a whole section on the culture of the performing artist. And the question that at least the artists with whom I've worked don't directly ask, but search and explore is, does this culture, which revolves around them, don't forget, I don't care who composes, choreographs, writes for, if it weren't for them, nothing would happen. And they're the low people on the totem pole. Does this culture protect them and keep them safe? And there is enormous pressure, say, from the internet, from social media, from even the unions that are supposed to protect them, their management, the scarcity of productions. Employment uncertainty is one of the big pressures in their life. I write about 4 uncertainties, which we could say are pressures. Employment uncertainty, time topsy-turvy, because when do they work? Night.
Mm-hmm.
Geographical relocations all the time, and relationship instability, because all these things feed relatedness. If they're partnering, let's say, someone who's not in the business 9 to 5, and they work, let's say, 7 o'clock call to 11, and then have to wind down, and their partner is snoozing away.
Yeah. It sounds like there must be ways to better cope, better understand these pressures and pitfalls, cope with them, rise above them, achieve excellence. It seems like there are ways to handle it, and I'm guessing that's one of the benefits of a book like yours.
Hopefully, because you hit the word you said, understand. First, these uncertainties have to be in awareness. If we don't know what's hitting us, how do we cope, handle, manage them? Hopefully, Hamlet's Mirror brings a lot of, oh, that's what it is. Oh my God. Ahas into awareness.
Well, let's talk about some of the responses you've received from readers of the book. You mentioned you have learned even more since the book has released and people have read it and you've received feedback. What has been the feedback from readers?
I talk about a section about feelings, and we get into trouble when we think that our feelings are facts and that our feelings define reality. So some of the feedback that I've gotten is, how can I say that our feelings are valuable and informative and are real to us when you say that they're not facts and that we certainly can't make, because I do say this, anybody feel anything. So every Friday, and believe me, I am not technologically savvy. I've never posted in my life, but I post now on my personal page and a Hamlet's Mirror page, a response to that. Feelings are really, really, really powerful. But if we act on them as if they're valid, if they're factual, we're cooked. They're subjective, they're personal, they can inform us, they give us a signature, they give our lives color and beauty, but they're not facts. And when we go out in the world, let's say sad, and take an action as if the situation is sad, rather than saying, I am sad, what is going on, or something. Check it out in reality. That was a response. So I wrote about it, and I think I wrote about it more articulately. I hope that I'm talking about it now. And I got a lot of responses saying, oh, I'm beginning to understand. They're mine. They're mine alone. And I have to live with them and kind of nurture them and then put them in perspective. We go to school to learn to think. Nobody ever goes to school to learn to feel.
That's a very good point. I'm curious. You mentioned that this book was several decades in the making. Is writing something you always wanted to do?
Never.
No.
Never. I'm a terrible speller. I sometimes stump spell check. And I'm a clinician who wrote a book. I'm not a writer. I enjoy it. I like what I wrote, but I wouldn't call myself a writer.
Would you consider writing more books?
I would consider, people have asked me that, thank you. I would consider, I think so, actually. If something needed expansion and I thought there was the learning and the content, I don't know if it would be a booklet, but I liked the process. I really did. It's a very cathartic process. You write, yes?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it is cathartic. You're right.
People say it's lonely. I didn't find it lonely.
Well, I'm curious because we do have authors and writers who listen to the podcast. I'm curious if there's advice in your book based on your experience that might apply to them. Now that you've gone through the process and you see what they deal with, is there anything that can translate for authors themselves? Performers maybe of a different ilk.
I would wonder how personally writers take critique. Taking things personally is really not performance potential building. I think we all have to remember that it's the other person's thinking process, and it comes from the other person's being, and everybody has a right to their thoughts and opinions, and we can always learn something. And it's not about our person, it's about our behavior. And when we start thinking, oh my God, he doesn't like me, or he thinks I'm a loser, or he can think I'm a terrible writer, might be. How can I improve? What can I learn? It's a learning experience. It's an opportunity to fulfill my potential or agree to disagree. But when it gets to the person, and I don't work with writers, so I don't know how personally they take critique. You can tell me that.
Yeah, I think it's right. Most writers would like to not take it personally, but that is a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, it's true with performers too. I think it's true for everybody. Mm-hmm. It's hard to hear rejection. I just wrote something on rejection, but it's from another. And how do they know about your person? Mm-hmm. And if it's a personal attack, consider the source. Sometimes if it's a personal attack, it's a compliment.
Well, that's a nice way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if people want to learn more about you and the book, follow your posts, that sort of thing, where should they go to find you?
They can go on my website. It's elmalinzkanefield.com. One word. And Linz is Linz. They can go to Amazon. They can go to Facebook. And I've got a couple of podcasts, I think, on YouTube.
Good. Okay. So people can find you on your website, Facebook, YouTube. Those are the big main places.
And Amazon.
And Amazon. And books available Amazon and any place else they can find them?
Barnes & Noble, I think.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's hope people pick up a copy.
Thank you.
Well, Elma, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. I want to wish you luck with Hamlet's Mirror, reaching your potential on stage and off. And congratulations on everything you've accomplished. And best of luck on this new writing journey.
Thank you. This was fun. I really appreciate you, Stacy.
Thank you. The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.